I'm going to show you how I learn Irish trad tunes on banjo by ear. This isn't specific to banjo, but that's what I happen to play. You should be able to apply this process to any instrument. A lot of people will tell you that you should learn tunes by ear, but it's hard to find any advice on how to actually do this. It's not an ability people are either born with or born without. It's a skill you can learn. Personally, I used to think it was impossible, something that only gifted musicians could do. But I kept at it and it's gotten much easier. Now, I'm not really qualified to be teaching this material, but I haven't seen it covered elsewhere in a way that would have helped someone like me who thought they simply lacked the innate capacity to learn by ear. If you're a professional and you think I'm seriously misleading beginners, please let me know. So, why learn by ear? There's several reasons. First, you may find that it's much easier to memorize tunes learned this way. Second, while you can find notation for just about any tune these days, the notation you find will likely be slightly different than the recording you heard that inspired you to learn the tune, or it may be different from the way your local session plays it. When you learn by ear, you can learn exactly the version that you want to learn. 3. You will really internalize the music much more than if you learn from written music. With written music, you are reading dots off a page and trying to translate them into music. When you learn by ear, you are learning from the music itself, which brings me to number 4. When learning by ear, you not only learn the tune, but you also absorb some of the style of the player you are learning from. The written version of a tune simply can't capture the way a great player will bring life to the tune. A recording can capture a lot of the magic, and learning by ear lets you learn some of that magic and not just the notes. Finally, once you get good at learning by ear, you can quickly pick up a tune from another player in person without asking them to write it down, which they probably don't have time to do. Even before you're totally comfortable learning by ear, you can just record them playing the tune on your phone and learn it at home at your own pace. This really opens doors musically and is invaluable for getting the most out of workshops and lessons. So, with all that said, let's get started. You need 3 things: your instrument, a recording of a tune that you want to learn, and software that can slow the recording down without changing the pitch. I like to use Transcribe from 7th String Software. Just go to 7thstring.com to find it. You can use it free for 30 days. After that, it costs $40. I think it's well worth it. There's also lots of other programs out there that work, but I'll be using Transcribe for this video. A lot of people use Amazing Slowdowner, but Transcribe has some features that I think are missing from Amazing Slowdowner. The most important thing is to find a setup that lets you quickly replay the same section of music over and over without having to manually rewind. When you're starting out, you may need to try dozens of different combinations of notes before you find the right one. And the less time you spend rewinding or seeking, the faster you'll be able to progress. I'll show you how easy it is to do this in Transcribe. Anyway, you can use whatever works best for you, but I would strongly recommend finding a setup that lets you restart over and over from the same point by hitting a single key. You may also want a piece of paper with blank staves or tablature on it so that you can write down the tune as you learn it. Eventually, you won't need to write tunes down to remember them as you're learning, but when I started, it was too hard to remember all the notes without writing them down. If you go to blanksheetmusic.net, you can print out blank staves or tablature. For tab, just click here, click on this doohickey, change it to 4-string tab. Sheet music is the default. Okay, on to the music. First, find a recording of a tune that you want to learn. Make sure it's a recording you really like listening to and not just the only version you could find of a tune you want to learn. When you're starting out, I recommend using a recording that is just someone playing the tune solo on your instrument. A recording of a band is okay if your instrument is prominently featured and very easy to pick out. You can learn from other instruments or from recordings of sessions, but it's much harder, and I advise against trying that until you get comfortable learning from a recording of the instrument that you play. For this video, I'm going to be learning the jig, The Mist-Covered Mountain. I'll be using Brian McGrath's recording from his album Pure Banjo. This isn't quite a solo recording, but I think you'll agree that the banjo is front and center. I'll talk a bit about how to find good recordings at the end of the video. So, start up Transcribe and open the audio file. Close this other tune that I was learning. Search for mist-covered mountain. Here it is. So the first thing we're going to do is add measure markers to the recording. This will keep us from losing track of where we are and will make it easy to find and select different sections of the tune later on. Just start playing the recording and tap M at the beginning of each measure. If you don't really know where the measures begin and end, just try to tap along with the rhythm of the song. Don't worry if you're occasionally early or late on a beat, it won't really matter. So here we go. Once you've gotten through the A and B parts of the tune and you're back to the A part again, you can stop. You don't need to mark the whole song, although you can go back and do that later if you want to learn variations that show up in repetitions of the tune. Okay, now that we've got measure markers, you need to double check that your instrument is in tune in concert pitch. It's possible but unlikely that the recording you're learning from isn't in concert pitch. I'll talk about how to deal with that at the end of the video. Okay, we're almost ready to start learning. The next thing we need to do is find the key of the piece. Eventually you'll be able to do this easily by ear, but if you're just getting started, look up the tune on the session.org and see what key it's in. Go to the session.org, click on tunes, type in the name of the tune, okay. I think this is it. Sometimes the tunes are listed under different names. Okay, yeah. Mist-covered mountains. This looks right. You may want to scroll down and see if anybody's posted any videos. Oh, hey, here's Brian McGrath playing the video, or playing the tune that we're trying to learn. Okay, this is definitely the right tune. So, scroll to the top, look at the settings. This line with the K is the key. A-Dor means A-Dorian. This one says A minor. I don't think that's right. Let's check a few more. A-Dorian, A-Dorian. Okay, they all say A-Dorian. Once we've looked that up, some tunes are played in multiple different keys. So even if you found a key on the session, we're going to need to double check that it's actually the key that it's recorded in. To check if you've got the right key, grab your instrument, start the tune playing in transcribe, and just strum this, or pick the single note for the tonic of the key. So we have A Dorian, so I'm just going to play this while picking A on my instrument. Now that doesn't sound too bad to me. If we were to do a different note like G, let's see what that would sound like. So you can hear how G is obviously wrong. I think A is the key that we need here. Another way to check if you're not sure is almost every tune will end on the tonic note. They don't all start on the tonic note, but if it's a A-Dorian piece, the last note in the tune is probably A. So we're pretty sure that we're dealing with an A-Dorian tune here. So we're going to go ahead and play through the scale for that key. If you don't know the scale for your tune, go learn it. It won't take that long and it'll make the rest of the process easier. Almost all of the notes in the tune are going to be one of the notes in the scale. So knowing the scale lets you eliminate a lot of guesswork. So here's A-Dorian. We're finally ready to actually learn the tune. So first, we're going to set the playback speed to either 50 or 70%. Doesn't really matter too much at this point, but to change the playback speed, go to this bar here. So we'll click 50%. And now we want to select the first phrase of the tune. By phrase, I mean the smallest section of music that seems to stand on its own. This is often 4 measures, so if you aren't sure, just start by selecting the first 4 measures. Bear in mind that if you were tapping the measure marker key twice a measure, then you'll have twice as many markers as I have here. It doesn't matter too much exactly what the numbers are. What we're going to do is listen to this and see if it sounds like a complete musical idea. Personally, I would say that's even sounds like two ideas. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this to only two measures. Okay, to me that sounds like the smallest piece that can stand on its own. I think if we go smaller than that, it's not going to sound like a full idea. So before we start trying to figure out any notes, what we want to do is listen to this on repeat several times and then try humming, whistling, lilting, or even yodeling along with it. It doesn't matter if you can't hit every note perfectly. The idea is just to get the tune in your head. I won't subject you to my singing in this video, but please don't skip this step. So once you've got the phrase in your head, it's time to actually try and pick out a few notes on the instrument. We're going to start at the beginning. So we're just going to play what we've got, hit spacebar to start and stop, and you can stop at any point once you've heard a few notes that you think you can take a crack at. So even that is enough, and you can just do it again by just tapping space. That's all you got to do. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what that first note is. A good guess is A. Like I said, not every tune starts on the tonic note for the key, but many do. So there's an A on my instrument. There's the note in the song. Sounds a little different to me. I think he's playing two notes. It could be A and E. I don't think it was the open A and E strings, so let's try the E an octave down on the D string, and then A. See how that sounds. That sounds pretty close to me. I could be wrong. My ear's not that good, but I think this is good enough to get started with. Now, you don't need to learn it with that double stop. I think we can just stick with the E and go from there. In other words, I'm going to say that E is the first note of the tune here. What comes next? Okay, there's two notes after that. Again, let's check A. It's a pretty common note in the key of A Dorian. Those sound right to me. So if you're using paper, you can go ahead and write those down for now. We're going to come back and double check them later, but let's keep going. So at this point, I want to expand those notes to the whole first measure. I'm just going to select the first measure so that I can just let it loop. So what I'm hearing is, starting from the notes that we have, it seems to sort of walk up the scale. So again, since we practiced the scale of the piece, we're not picking from any possible note. We're going to limit ourselves to the notes in the scale that we learned. That's going to make it a lot easier. And we're going to try some different combinations. So how about... Okay, so I played E, A, C natural, and D. That didn't sound right to me. If that sounds the same to you, listen to it a few more times. I'm pretty sure that's not right. So let's try another possibility here. This time I'm going to do E, A, B, and then D. That sounds a lot closer. Now, to double check that we've got it right, I'm just going to let this go ahead and loop, and I'm going to play along with it with the notes that I have so far. Okay, that sounds pretty good to me. I think we've got it. Again, if you're writing down, write the notes down. At this point, we've done the first half of the first phrase, and we can move on to measure 2, which is the second half of the first phrase. Sometimes, depending on how you select this, you don't quite get the attack of the note, and it can be a little tricky. So let's try that again. Okay, so again, sing this. You already did that. You know, hum, whistle, whatever, just to make sure that you still got the notes in your head. And then repeat the process. Okay, so listen to those first 3 notes. Let's see if we can find those. Okay, first one's an A. And it sounds to me like it goes from A to some other note and back to A. That doesn't sound right. That sounds right. I think I hear 2 A's in a row. And again, you can always stop and just let this loop in order to check what you've got so far. I think we're right so far. And now there's 2 notes at the end that go down the scale. Okay, so I was able to pick those 2 out on the first try there. You won't be able to pick them out on your first try when you're starting. You're going to have to hunt around for notes. That's okay. You will get better at it. When I first started doing this, it took me weeks to get through a single tune. So don't get discouraged if you can't pick them out right away. So let's try that whole section. Okay, the first time through I made a mistake, corrected it, and I think I was playing that correctly. So we have the first and second measure figured out. So that's the whole first phrase. We're going to go back, select the first 2 measures, which we decided was the first phrase of the tune. Listen to it again. Okay, and let's see if we can play along with that, with what we learned so far. I'm going to let it play once, and then I'll come in the second time. I wouldn't say I'm playing it very well yet, but I think the notes are correct. Okay, so I want to say, again, if this is difficult, keep at it. If you work on the first phrase for an hour and you don't feel like you have it, put it aside and come back to it the next day. Your brain is going to figure out how to do this while you're sleeping. It'll be easier the next day. Again, it literally took me weeks to learn my first tune this way. But if you don't give up, you are going to get it, and the next one that you do will be easier. And once you've done 10 of them, it'll actually start to feel easy, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I want to reiterate that when you're just starting out, the most important thing is that you're able to try notes over and over again until you figure them out. And you need to be able to do this quickly. So in transcribe, as you've noticed, I simply hit the space bar to start the selected clip over again. So that means if I'm having trouble finding a note, I can try a note, hit space, play the note again, and I can quickly go back and forth and check whether they're the same note. I don't even have to put down my pick to do this. And so you can really try a lot of different things. This is very important for when you're stuck. If you have to manually rewind or if you have to seek to the right point, you're going to spend all of your time fighting with the recording and none of the time actually trying out notes. So if you don't use transcribe, I really recommend that you use something where you have a very easy way to start from the same piece of music over and over again. Like that. Now that we've got the first phrase figured out, I want to take a minute to just sit back and listen to the structure of the tune. So I'm going to turn the speed back up to 70%, and I'm just going to let the A part play. So there's a very common pattern in Irish music called call and response. And this is the idea that the tune is made up of a phrase, a response to that phrase, another phrase that's probably similar to the first one, and then another response. And the idea is that there's sort of a conversation going on between two characters here. So if you listen to the first phrase, and then the second phrase, hopefully you can imagine how the second phrase could be an answer to the first one. First character says this, and then the next character says this. Now let's hear the next phrase. That sounds a lot like the first phrase again. And then this one sort of sounds to me like a conversation stopper. That's sort of the end of the conversation here for now. So it's a call, a response, another call, and then a different response. So again, if we just listen to the A part, or the first time through the A part, okay, so call, response, call, final response. Now, why am I bothering to talk about this? Understanding the structure is going to help you learn the tune faster. You may notice that some sections get repeated almost note for note at different points. So let's listen to the first two measures. And now let's listen to measures 5 and 6. They're very similar. So this is great news. When you get to the point of learning measure 5, it's going to be so similar to measure 1 that you're not going to have to do as much work. Now, it is different at the end of measure 6. So there is a change there. You're going to have to do some work, but you've already figured out most of that phrase before you even get to it. Now, the other benefit of taking the time to understand how the tunes are structured is that once you've learned, 20 or 30 tunes by ear this way, you're going to start to notice that there are common phrases that appear in lots of tunes, or slight variations on phrases that appear almost identical in different tunes. So because of this, at some point, if you keep up with this, you're going to have the experience of sitting down to learn a tune. You're going to hear the first phrase, and you're just going to be able to play it without even thinking about it. And this feels really cool the first time it happens. If you saw somebody else do it, you'd think that they had some amazing special talent, but it's actually something that just comes as a result of putting in the time to learn how to do this. This is a skill, like I said. So now that we understand a little something about the structure of the tune, let's go back and just learn the rest of the A part. So we already know the first two measures. And again, that's the first phrase in the call and response. And now we're going to learn the second phrase. So go ahead and select that and play it. Now, like I said, this is a somewhat similar structure to the first phrase, but as you can hear, the harmony has changed. If you don't hear that, don't worry about it. The idea is just that it sounds like it's coming from a different sort of spot in the key. So again, first steps here, we just got to find the first note, and we know where to start. And luckily, in this tune, we have 3 of the same note right at the beginning there. You can hear that pretty clearly. Actually, 4, sorry. So let's figure out what that note is. So this time, I'm not going to try to pick out the first note on the first try. I might be able to do that, I might not. I'm just going to go up the scale to show you how you can do this even if you're kind of feeling clueless here. So let's listen to the note. So we're going to start on the D string here. It's not D. It's Doesn't sound right either. That was E. Doesn't sound right. There it is. So I just started it on the D string, and I just went up until I got to G. And now we know the correct note. And then again, just like in the first part, we hang out on that note for a little while, and then we go up this. We sort of walk up the scale. So I'm going to narrow this down to just the third measure. Let's see if we can figure that out. I'm going to check the last note. Okay, so this one's easy. It doesn't skip any notes in the scale. It simply goes. Okay, and now let's do the next measure. Now there's a triplet in there. I'm going to ignore that for now. I have a word to say about triplets, but for now, we're just going to find the note that he's playing that triplet on. So he's playing two different notes there. If you can't hear that, you can always slow down. So you can hear there's two of the same note, and then it starts to go down in pitch. So let's see if we can find those two. There it is. That's not right. Okay, there it is. So he's playing, but we're going to keep it simple, and instead of playing a triplet, we're just going to do. And the next note, we're ending on an A here. I'm going to turn the speed back up so it sounds more like music. So that just sounds like it's going straight down the scale the entire time. So okay, so there were a couple skipped notes in there, but if you, I mean skipped in the scale, there were some notes that we skipped over while walking down the scale there. But as long as you stick to the notes that you know are in the key, in the scale, it's not going to take you too long to figure out which are the right ones to play. All right, so just like with the first phrase, once we've got that figured out, we want to go back and double check that we can play the whole phrase correctly along with the recording. Okay, other than that note that I missed, that sounded correct. Now let's take a quick look at the next phrase. And remember what we learned by looking at the structure of the tune, paying a little attention there, is that this sounds a lot like the first phrase again. So it's going to start the same. Okay, so the first measure is exactly the same. Second measure gets a little different. So we're going to isolate that. So this is one of the more interesting patterns we've had to learn so far. It's not just going up or down the scale. So let's get those first three notes. Okay, so that's an E. Okay, so I got the first three notes picked out. That's E, C natural, and A. And of course you can go down to even smaller selections here. So we got to find that first note. There it is, it's a B. So it sounds like B and C natural. So this whole measure goes. So let's select the whole measure and see if that works. Sounds good to me. So now let's check the third phrase. Okay, I think we got it. And finally, we have the final two measures of the tune, or of the A part, and these are going to be different. They're not much like the others, although you can sort of hear that same up and down pattern that we had in the second phrase, I think. So let's isolate that. Let's just measure 7. Find the first note. E again. So that's E, F sharp, and G. So let's see if we can figure out that whole measure. I don't think that's quite right. Maybe it ends on G. A good technique is to check the final note of the section you're trying to figure out, and then you know where you need to end up. Sounds like it ends on G. So I think it's, based on that, I think it's... All right, I think we got that. One more measure. Okay, again, there's a triplet at the beginning. We're going to ignore that for now and try to find something simpler. Okay, so I think with the triplet, it's... But we're going to play... And then let's get that last note. It's just an A. When you're at the end of a part, A part or B part, you're almost certainly going to land on the tonic note, which in this case is A, at some point. Now, the part doesn't necessarily have to have the tonic as its exact last note, because a lot of times you use a different note to lead back in to the A part. So in this case, I think he's doing... Yeah, it's ending on G again, so we have... And so if we were to lead back into the beginning of what we already learned, it's going to go like... like that. One thing I want to briefly touch on is the issue of accidentals, which are notes that are not technically in the key that you're playing in. So, as I've said, it's easier to find notes if you stick to the notes that are in the key that you're playing in. But some tunes have notes outside of the key. And when you run into one of those, you're not going to be able to find it if you only stick to the notes in the key. Now, one way to find it is to simply zero in on it by finding the note that is lower than the note that you're trying to find and the note that's higher. If you can do that, then the accidental that you're looking for is in between those two notes. That's sort of a last resort. It can be easier to find them if you simply learn what the common accidentals are and how they usually work. So I won't spend too much time on this, but I'll just briefly talk about the major seventh, which is a common accidental in keys that don't have a major seventh. So for instance, D Mixolydian, which is, sorry, that was D Dorian. D Mixolydian, it has that flat 7. And so a lot of Mixolydian tunes, you'll find they also occasionally throw in the major 7, which is that note. And the way that it's usually used is as a leading tone into the tonic. So you'll usually hear it as played right before you go up 1/2 step to the tonic D. So if you know that, then a lot of times you'll hear that that half step that sounds a little bit funny. It sounds a little out of place in the tune, and you'll just know right away, I know what that is. That's a major 7th leading into the tonic instead of playing the flat 7 or minor 7, which is actually in the key. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the entire tune this way. The video will, I think, get pretty boring, but hopefully this gets you started. And what I recommend doing is once you've got the whole A part learned in this fashion, again, just select those first 8 measures for the A part and set the tempo to something that you're very comfortable playing along with. And just play along with the recording at a slow tempo. First of all, this is just a good way to practice what you've learned and actually get it under your fingers. The other thing, while you're doing this, you should make sure that you're mimicking the phrasing and the rhythm and the accents as closely as you can. This is how you're going to absorb at least some of the magic of the tune. Now, I don't think anybody's going to come out of this experience being able to play this tune as well as Brian McGrath plays it, but if you can get just a little bit of what he's putting into it, it's going to make you a better musician. And of course, once you've done the A part, continue with the B part, and so on and so forth. Okay, I want to say a quick word about ornaments and variations. When the recording you're learning from has them, you should definitely learn them. But I really recommend learning the tune in as plain a fashion as you can at first. And the reason for doing this is if you're learning a recording from somebody like Brian McGrath, for instance, and you, from the beginning, if you just learn their version note for note, what can happen is that, and this has happened to me, you realize that after you've learned it, it's too difficult to play at a good tempo because there's just too much going on. The other reason to learn a plain version first is that if you learn it note for note, then you're going to have one version in your head and in your fingers that's going to have the ornaments and the variations and whatever in the same place every single time. And the purpose of ornaments and variations is to add variety. So if you just learn them by rote and play them the same way every time, you're not adding any variety. So if you learn the plain version and then you learn the ornaments and the variations, then while you're doing that, you can learn how to add them or not add them at different points, and that allows you to play a more interesting version of the tune. 2 more quick notes. First, how do you find recordings? The best place to start is generally tracks from albums that you own. If you only have them on CD and you don't have them on your computer, you're going to have to download them or rip them onto the computer. I'm not going to go into how to do that if you don't know how to do that. The other really good option is there's just a ton of videos on YouTube with great, often solo performances of the tune. So that can be a really good resource. So, for instance, if we hadn't had the Brian McGrath version of Mist-Covered Mountain, maybe we'd find a good version on YouTube. So I recommend searching for your instrument. It's always a good idea to learn it from somebody playing your instrument instead of a different instrument. Okay, yeah, so there's like a bunch of different banjo renditions. So we'll take this one here. I'm going to pause it. So you can't obviously load directly from a YouTube video into Transcribe, but there are options for downloading YouTube videos. So we're going to search for YouTube Downloader. I've used this site many times. You just go ahead, copy the URL from YouTube, paste it here, hit start. And now we have a downloadable version. So this site has some sketchy ads on it here, and definitely don't allow it to do that. When you hit download, it opens a new tab that tries to get you to install crap. Just ignore that. But anyway, it'll download and you'll get your version of the video. The audio for the video, rather. And then the other thing I wanted to cover is how to deal with recordings that aren't in concert pitch. So when you're checking the key of the piece, you may find either that nothing you play sounds right, which probably means that the tuning is not in concert pitch. The other thing you might find is that like the session.org lists the key of the tune as A, and you might find that it appears to be in B flat. Like when you play a B flat, that sounds like the right note. So this can happen if people are tuning their instrument up or down a half step or using a capo. So in either case, there's a good way to deal with this. So in Transcribe, go to the Window menu, which I'm sorry you can't see in this video, but click Window and go to Audio Effects and Controls. And you'll get a bunch of different options here. So you want the Tuning tab. This allows you to adjust the tuning of the piece in fractional cents or in semitones. So for instance, we can play our tune. Let's see what happens if we put it up, say 20 cents. Okay, so you can hear that's a little higher. So if you have a recording in a non-standard pitch, it's much easier to tune your instrument to concert pitch and then play around with the tuning here until you get the recording into concert pitch, because obviously dragging this thing is a lot faster than retuning your instrument. The other thing you can do is sometimes you have a tune, so for example, Out on the Ocean is commonly played in G and A, and maybe you only have a G version, but you want to learn how to play it in A. You can adjust the tuning up 2 half steps to get from G to A, and now when you play your G recording, it's going to sound in A, and you'll be able to learn it on your instrument in A. So this is really useful stuff. The other thing that's handy in here that I'll briefly mention is the speed tab here. In the normal transcribe view, you have 100, 70, 50, 35, 25. Here you can make more fine-tuned adjustments. So you don't really need this too much when you're just figuring stuff out. But what it's useful for is when you're practicing. Say you get to the point where you can play along at 70%. Well, the difference between 70 and 100% is huge. You're not going to be able to do that in one jump. So here you can drag it to, 80, or maybe the tune is just slightly out of reach for you, and so you can play it at, maybe, somewhere in the 90s, but you can't quite play it at 100. So this is really nice for practicing pieces, and it can be a little more fun than a metronome also, since you're playing along with a really good version of the tune. So that's about it. go and learn some tunes. Stick with it. It'll be difficult at first. It will get easier. And once you get the hang of this, you're going to wonder why you ever did it any other way. So hope this has been helpful. Thanks a lot.